Godzilla, King of the Monsters is directed by Michael Dougherty and is the sequel to the 2014 reboot, which is also in the same universe as Kong Skull Island. And this movie takes place 5 years after the event of the first one from 2014 when Godzilla basically destroyed San Francisco. And Sofia Farmiga, who was there during the events of San Francisco, is a scientist and she has created this device called the Argo. And when villainous people hijack this device to awake the Titans, it's up to Kyle Chandler to save his ex-wife and his daughter, played by Millie Bobby Brown, and it's up to Godzilla to fight off these Titans in the most badass way possible, and mostly, yeah, the movie succeeds on delivering us these awesome fight scenes. I was actually a big fan of Godzilla when it first came out 5 years ago, and I know people had issues with Godzilla not being in the movie enough. And while I at the time did not see that or find that as an issue, I do understand that issue now, but personally I actually really like that aspect because it gave us more of an emotional payoff when Godzilla did fight those monsters. I'm also just a big fan of monster movies, creature features, and big CGI things fighting each other, so I was pretty excited for this movie. And for the most part, this movie succeeds in everything that I wanted from this movie and everything that it had to offer, and for some reason I'm not as wowed as I wanted to be, but I don't necessarily think that's the movie's fault itself. I do think that may be from my personal expectations that may have been a bit too high for this movie coming off the original Godzilla, but I don't want that to merit the fact that I really enjoy this movie because almost everything in this movie does work. I personally came for the fight scenes, and yes, all of the fight scenes deliver. They're awesome, they're badass. Godzilla is badass. I don't think he was as badass, at least personally for me, than he was in the first Godzilla, but I still think that Godzilla, he is the titular king of monsters. Everything Godzilla does is awesome. The creature designs are beautiful. This movie is beautifully shot. Lawrence Sher did the cinematography for this movie, and I actually really like Lawrence Sher's work with the Hangover trilogy, and he brings some beautiful imagery to this movie, and I absolutely love the shifting of coloring of orange and blue that the movie had throughout its runtime. I think that Lawrence Sher brought some beautiful visuals to this movie, stuff that could just be on a big ass wallpaper. It is absolutely beautiful with these Titans. And even with the scale from humans to these ginormous Titans, you feel that you are these small humans and there's these ginormous monsters right above you, and I also hope that the screening that I saw was an IMAX, which is just an extra treat. And a big issue that people had with the 2014 Godzilla were the characters, that no one really cared about the main characters. In this one, you care more about the characters. The three main characters in particular, Vera Farmiga, Millie Bobby Brown, and Kyle Chandler, you care more about the characters. Personally, I didn't love them, but you understand the motivations, you understand their dynamic, and you're rooting for them throughout the entire movie because they're your main characters. They're not as thin or dull as their characters in the previous movies, so I like that we actually cared a little bit about the characters. But besides the three characters, there are a bunch of background characters in this movie, including Ken Watanabe, who is returning, and with those background characters, there are some I liked, there's some I didn't like, and there's some who I really did not really know or care about, and I would be okay with that, except that the movie during the climax scene did make us want to care about one of the characters because they were injured. I'm like, I have no idea who you are. There is one character who is the comic relief. I totally blanking on his name, but he is the comic relief who's more like, yeah, no shit Sherlock throughout the entire movie, and I thought he was gonna get on my nerves, and he didn't get on my nerves, so that's good. The only character who I wasn't a big fan of is this human character who's the bad guy, the big bad guy, and he was bad and old and you don't really understand why he's really there. You kind of get like one person asked him to be there and that's the only real reason why he's there, and he actually just disappears near the end of the movie. And I can understand that they may be setting him up for the next movie, Godzilla vs. Kong, which is hinted at during a post-credit scene, but that character during that movie really was fairly weak, with weird and questionable motivations, and I felt like we didn't get a real full grasp of that character. And not everything else in this movie works. The motivation for why they're unleashing these Titans, it makes sense. It is a bit of a ham-fisted message that we have received 100 times before, but you kind of understand it, and the fact that I'm debating on if it's a good motivation or bad motivation, I guess makes it a good motivation. But watching the movie, it does seem a little bit forced, and we have gotten this message tons and tons of times before. But surprisingly, my biggest issue in this movie is rather a minor one. It's closer to the end of the movie, right before the climax. We're in between two fight scenes, and the characters have to go and do this one task, which makes sense in the plot in the movie. It needs to happen, but I feel like they spent a little more time than they should have during this mission. I feel like the movie could have easily flowed better if it just cut off 5 to 10 minutes of that section. Because this movie is a little bit over 2 hours, and surprisingly, a lot happened to this movie when you really think about it. And during that part, I did feel like the movie did start to slow down a little bit, but not that much that it ruined the overall experience. None of my issues ruined the overall experience of the movie, because I still really enjoyed this movie. It's an absolute blast. But I do feel like if they trimmed down that small section of the movie overall would have flowed a lot better. And there are some plot points that come up in this movie that you feel like the characters would have more of a revelation about when really they just throw it aside. And I think, no, that That idea is pretty interesting, we should go back to that, but the characters don't. Once again, it doesn't ruin the overall experience, it's just a little nitpicky. And while I did say I did enjoy the characters more than the first Godzilla, the way that the movie ends its characters I was not a huge fan of. At least with the first movie, we got emotional closure with a couple of the main two characters in the movie. In this movie, the main characters, especially the main three, their plot ends, the story ends. But you feel like their emotional story continues, and I don't think it would have harmed the movie if they added 2 to 3 minutes more of just concluding these characters. Yes, they're gonna return for the sequel, but if the sequel never happens and the movie just ended here, I think that the character story ended kind of poorly because the movie literally just cuts them off and focuses back on Godzilla, which I'm not complaining about because I do like when a movie did focus on Godzilla, because surprisingly enough, I don't feel like that the movie really learned from the last movie of not giving us enough Godzilla, because overall, I don't think Godzilla was in this movie that much. We do get a lot of monsters and titans fighting, but I don't feel like Godzilla himself was in the movie that much. Once again, it's not a big issue for me, it was never an issue for me in the first one, but I do feel like if people had an issue with that the last movie, they may find that again in this movie. But another element that the first movie had that this one didn't was the paranoia and terror in the public eye, because in this movie we focus mainly on our main 3 characters, and the supporting characters, we don't really get that much experience with the public's view of how they're reacting to all these massive titans destroying their homeland. The first movie, Godzilla, does this a lot. We get the human's perspective of these big monsters, and yes, we get humans' perspective of them, but they're our main characters, and I loved in the first movie the public's view of these characters, and I do feel like that this movie was missing that element. But once again, it did not ruin the overall experience for this movie, because I really did like this movie. It gave me exactly what I wanted, big monsters fighting each other, and characters I actually did care more about than I thought I would. And this movie is absolutely visually stunning, and it sounds amazing. I highly recommend seeing this on the biggest screen possible. The movie does lag in a certain section, and it does have an off character, and it definitely does cut off the main characters emotionally, but I don't think it ruins the overall feeling for this movie for me. I'm very conflicted on where I'd put this movie. This is a bordering movie for me because I did really enjoy this movie. I'm just not sure if I would like it more or less on a second viewing, so I would say that Godzilla King of the Monsters is a soft, great movie. So that's Godzilla King of the Monsters. What do you guys think? Have you seen the movie? Have you not seen the movie? Whatever you think, put the comments below and maybe I'll read it, maybe I won't. Thank you as always for watching, and if you haven't, then click my last video right over here, and you can click my upcoming video right over here. Thank you as always for watching, and hope to see you next time.